How's it going, everyone? It's Blake here from ChessPathways.com, and in today's video, we're going to talk about how to handle it when a repetition occurs in one of your games. A lot of players get this wrong, and it's something that I haven't seen too much material out there really teaching players how to handle these situations, so I thought I'd make a video of my own. So we're going to start out with this game here. Go ahead and think about how you would handle this position with white, what your plan would be, who's better, is black better, is white better, and just kind of how you would handle this position. Go ahead and pause your video, take about 30 seconds to a minute to really think about it. Alright, if you're back with me, hopefully the first thing you've noticed is there's a material imbalance, right? I have two minor pieces for a rook. That usually favors the side with the two minor pieces if there's no pawns to compensate, right? 6 points versus 5 if we're going by beginner point count. Also, black has doubled pawns here, and those can take on even more significance when you have the two minor pieces against the rook because, again, you can just attack it more times than it can be defended. So my assessment here was I was feeling really good about this position. I thought it should be much better to winning for white, but actually proving it, of course, is always a different matter. So my first plan here was simply going after the weakness, right? That should be one of the first plans that comes to your mind. This is clearly a target. So I thought if I can simply play knight g2, knight e1, knight d3, and pick up the pawn, that should be another pawn to add to my material advantage. So that's what I tried to do, knight g2. But my opponent, who was one of my students, found a really nice response to this. Simply bishop h6, stopping my plan. And now, if I swing the knight back around like this, I'm giving the rook access to the second rank, and that is not at all what I want, right? I don't want this rook picking up pawns. So I came back, and my opponent did a really good thing here. He stepped back too and created a repetition. So here's the important principle. When your position is worse off, it's your opponent's responsibility to drive the game forward, right? A lot of players would kind of avoid this move because it's a repetition, and maybe think about some other way to, come up with some plan here, trying to penetrate to the d2 square. Here, I guess it's probably hard to find an alternative because, c5's hanging and there's only one move that defends it. But just remember this principle. When you are worse off, you don't have to do anything. I see it all the time in like a rook endgame where someone tries to get too active with their king, march it all the way to the other side of the board and pick up pawns, and the opponent had no way through before, but because you try to do something active, they find the win. Right? If you're defending a pawn-down rook in game, you don't have to do anything. It's your opponent who has to do something. Very often you see good players just shuffle a rook back and forth, defending a rook in game, waiting for the opponent to actually make a meaningful threat that has to be addressed. So black repeats, and I have to find a new idea. I really wasn't sure what my plan was now. I mean, if I can't move the knight, because I have to watch out for bishop h6, how do I actually get to this weakness? And if I can't get to that weakness, how do I actually win this game? I don't have any pawn majorities that can make a passed pawn, so, what do I do? It's not so easy. So I tried bishop h5. I wasn't really sure what the long-term plan was here. I thought it might be nice to have g6 as an option to come to. I thought maybe if the rook lifts, I can swing around and target c6. So bishop h5. And now my opponent finds another great move, rook d4, going after my, my e4 pawn. So I came back to f3, right? Bishop f3. And here my opponent should have repeated again and played rook d8. In fact, I'm only realizing now, black can actually claim a draw by playing rook d8. That's the third repetition. If you go take a look, we have this position here once, right? This position right here, right? Go back a couple moves. The position with the knight on e3 and the bishop on f8. We have it once here, right? That was the original position. This is the first time we're seeing this position. Knight g2, here, back. That's the second time we see this position. Bishop h5, here, bishop f3. If black comes back, that would have been the third time that position occurs. So if you're playing in a tournament, there's kind of a procedure you do here. You write rook d8 on your score sheet, and then you don't press the clock. You don't actually make the move and press the clock. After you press the clock, it's no longer your turn. You can't make any claims. You write rook d8 on your score sheet, then you say, I intend to play rook d8, which would result in a threefold repetition, and therefore I'm claiming a draw by threefold repetition. Online, I think it's similar. You hit the draw button and then make the move, and it'll give you the draw. But here, black tried to kind of press forward with king h6, and this was something I was very happy to see because now the bishop h6 resource is no longer there, which was a key part of black's defense. So now I implement the knight plan, right? Bring the knight around to d3, and now black's not going to be in time to kind of access the d2 square, right? So king h4, knight d3, and now black's position kind of crumbles, right? All the pawns fall, and they could have had the repetition, but they chose not to take it, and now white is winning. So just remember that lesson. We both messed this up pretty badly. Remember, when you have a worse position, it is not your job to avoid a repetition. A lot of players think they're always bad. They always want to avoid them. When you're worse off, it's not your job. Conversely, when you have an advantage, it is your job to avoid a repetition, and I didn't do it here. Somehow, I guess because it was a daily game and I wasn't sitting here, focusing on the one game, I forgot that was actually a threefold repetition. I didn't realize that if black had simply played rook d8 in that position, that was the third repetition, and I could have had this advantage go to waste. Black could have claimed a draw by repetition if he took that third repetition. So when you're better off, avoid it. When you're not better off, you don't need to avoid it. Another example from another game I played. This was a game I played online against an international master about half a year ago. I actually made a whole video about this game. I'll put a link down in the description. But we got this interesting middle game from a Ruy Lopez. I'm white here. I kind of realized I probably don't have an advantage here. Black has some pretty nice pressure against my center. I have no clear plan. Black can play d5 at some point and use their 2-on-1 central majority to take over the center. But I do have an attack against this b5 pawn, so I was curious how Black wanted to deal with that. Black played queen a4. I stepped back to attack the queen. They came to a2. And again, you don't want to give in. I can go attack this pawn again and force this queen to go back and defend it, right? So bishop b3, queen a4. And no need to give in. I just step back. I'm going to force this queen to a worse square if Black wants to avoid the draw. And if they don't want to avoid the draw, that's fine. It's their job to avoid it. They probably have an advantage, plus they're higher rated. So they come back to a6, and now I've succeeded in forcing that queen to a worse square, right? It doesn't get to sit on a4, attacking the e4 pawn. It has to sit here, where, it could possibly run into some pins at some point, and it's just not as active there. So if you're willing to kind of stick to the repetition and force your opponent to deviate if they're better, not only can you sometimes get a draw, your opponent's probably not going to give you the draw if they're truly better, but you're going to force some small concession. They have to make a move they might not want to play to avoid the repetition, and that's really the main point. So keep this principle in mind when you're playing chess. Alright, thanks for watching everyone. Please make sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below, and don't forget to visit chesspathways.com and get signed up there too. It's totally free, only takes 5 seconds, and I'll send you a free move-by-move guide to chess thinking when you sign up. It took me way too long to become a chess master, and I want to help you do it in a fraction of the time. Thanks, and I'll see you there.